Welcome to the PFC podcast. I'm your host, Coach Mike Payton. I'm a certified personal trainer, and I'll be giving you tips and tricks on how to improve your overall fitness and help you make progress in the gym. Let's get right into the show. Yeah, so Josh, who are you?
Good question. Well, my name is Josh,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a mental health counselor.
Okay.
Main thing that I do for work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, been doing that full time for 3.5 years now.
3.5 years. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how'd you get into that? Like, what was the process of?
Yeah. So before doing this, I was doing youth ministry for a couple years,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of while doing youth ministry, which I kind of just committed to for a couple years as a way to kind of figure out what I was doing with my life.
Mm-hmm.
Had kind of the idea, having worked with teens through that kind of avenue
Mm-hmm.
of what would it look like to kind of also work with teens and kind of like significant parts of their life, but more in a mental health sort of direction.
Okay. So it was more of like I don't know, like looking at teens and how their like brains work. Because I did youth ministry for like 2 years, and that was like that was something that I thought was really cool too. Was like, how do I effectively convince these like teenagers to pray every day or whatever? And is that like a similar thing for you?
Yeah, it's a little bit different because I definitely wandered a little bit kind of career-wise. It's also like in seminary for a little bit. I enjoyed studying philosophy back in the day. So like all those kind of like big concepts. A consistent theme is always kind of like encountering people in the deep part of their lives. And what does it look like for a person to like thrive like at like the deepest levels? So kind of the intellectual kind of side, what does it mean to thrive? And then what does it actually look like to encounter real people and like real friends and stuff like that and help them to do that? So
that's cool.
The obviously like the brain science stuff is kind of interesting, but it's not as much my area of interest.
Yeah.
It's more the how to actually like sit in a room with someone and talk to them in like a really meaningful way. And so that was more the appeal of counseling, I suppose. It's a way where you can really do that in kind of a very serious and very direct sort of way.
Yeah. So so what's like your goal with like counseling? Is it to like just encounter the person, or is it to like help them through a process, or like what's that?
Yeah. So I'd say I'm very goal oriented as a counselor. So very much you can do a bunch of different things with mental health counseling, and a lot of it depends on what the client's goals are. I'm not there in their real life. I just talk with them for an hour, right? So I'm there to kind of help guide them or give them the space to kind of have some sort of encounter, I would say. It's kind of our means that we use, some sort of encounter, which in some way kind of helps them to achieve their goals in their life. So they come in, they tell me their goals. Maybe they say, I want to be less depressed or less anxious. Those are some of the more common ones, right?
Right.
And I say, all right, well, let's talk about that. Let's kind of clarify kind of what's making you depressed and anxious so you can understand that better. Let's maybe brainstorm some things that you could do that would kind of help. And let's also just kind of create a safe space for you to just like process some of the really emotional questions or issues that are going on in your life. And by processing that and feeling supported, that also sometimes helps people open up to accomplish the things in their life they need to accomplish.
Okay. So like you're looking at their goals specifically, like I don't know, depression, anxiety, and then you're kind of like breaking it down, like, okay, what's like causing that, and then like what are like practical steps and how to like combat this or like kind of solve it.
Precisely.
Right?
Okay. Yep, you got it.
Do you ever work with anybody like this? Was something I was thinking about the past couple of days as we kind of led up to this interview. Was like, do you ever work with people who like are struggling with more of like eating disorders or anything like that?
Yeah, I've not worked myself with people with eating disorders.
Okay.
So I have a couple of colleagues that'll specialize in that a little bit more than I do, and definitely learned a bit about it when I was in grad school.
Right.
But no, that's not been part of my clinical experience.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's like I feel like that might be a niche area too. But you did learn about it. I'm interested to know, like, I don't know, what did you learn about it? Like, because just to give you reference, like in the health and fitness space, that's a very common issue. Because you have a lot of like self-image issues, and eating disorders can kind of like take root in that, just because of self-image. It's like, well, I'm too fat, or I'm too skinny, or whatever. And then and then it leads to like those just eating disorders. I'm sure anxiety and depression are follow in there
Definitely
too.
play into it.
But yeah, what did you learn about it? Because what would you
Yeah.
tell? What would you tell somebody that was like struggling with that? I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
pushing me a
based
little
on
bit
your-
beyond kind of what I know
Yeah,
super well.
I know.
The
Yeah.
body image stuff. The body image stuff definitely I have a little bit more experience
Mhm.
with, and so obviously that's
Yeah,
a piece
yeah.
of, but not the
Talk-
whole
talk
thing
on that
with
more then, yeah.
eating disorders.
Talk on the body image stuff.
Yeah,
That's great.
one of the main, so there's different modalities in counseling, right?
Mhm.
So one of the most kind of common ones, and there's lots of research for it, is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that
Yeah.
before.
So a lot of people talk about that, the kind of basic kind of like model or the way of viewing human emotion that goes with CBT.
Mhm.
It's kind of this like 3-part idea where whenever you have a specific emotion, it always starts with a thought. So the example I always give is you're walking down the road and you see a lion. First thing that happens is I have this thought, oh, the lion might eat me.
Yeah.
Runs through my head, right? So
Right.
it starts with the thought. Then you have the emotion. The lion example, I'm going to probably feel some fear.
Right.
Body's going to start getting tensed up and energized and ready to run or something like that, right?
Mhm.
Which, as I feel that fear, feel my stomach, have the blood start pumping, I then have the third thing, which is the action, which is the thing that I do, run away from the lion.
Mhm.
So it starts with the thought, followed by the emotion, followed by motivates us to act in some sort of way.
Okay.
Thought, emotion, action.
Thought, emotion, action.
So our emotions tend to kind of have these thoughts that go with them, which are different than kind of our like normal, like rational thoughts, you could think.
Mhm.
So with something like body dysmorphia or like eating disorders, things like that, there's generally something emotional going on where it's kind of throwing these thoughts into our minds, these perceptions, which are just kind of automatic, that aren't rational. A emotion somewhere in that person's life, maybe from trauma, maybe from something else, I don't know, learned something that it then just kind of keeps putting on replay, right? And keeps kind of throwing into that person's life. So we're talking about eating disorder. Maybe it's kind of that the person's fat or something like that, right? That thought will keep popping into their head. Their emotion just keeps throwing it out. And because it's such like an overwhelming feeling or such an overwhelming thought from the emotion, it would make it so that they're not able to like just talk themselves out of it.
Interesting. So because the thought's reoccurring, and something's like causing the reoccurrence, that's causing like the outward expression is what you're saying, or like I'm missing that third thing. I was
so few to throw a couple more pieces in. On like the physical side, which is not the side I know the most, but people will talk about like the prefrontal cortex is kind of like the part of the brain that does a lot of our thinking for us. When you get into fight or flight mode, which when you're feeling intense, especially anxiety, that tends to kick us into fight or flight mode. The more that you're in that, the more that your prefrontal cortex shuts down. Okay. Because you don't need to be analyzing the lion that's in front of you. You need to be running away from the lion, right? Yeah. So you're just kind of in reactive mode. Thinking shuts down and you just get into kind of that more emotional state where whatever your kind of initial immediate thoughts and whatnot are, those are the things you're more likely to just kind of like act on and stick with. Okay. So if someone is overwhelmed emotionally because of stuff they've been through in their life, then it's going to be really hard for them to talk themselves out of those automatic thoughts. So if someone is in a place where they have these automatic thoughts, like kind of a perception of themselves being like too heavy, too fat or something like that, right? That automatic thought, if it's an overwhelming emotion that's with it, and they can get stuck in that for some reason, some sort of cycle, it shuts down their thinking brain, and then they're not able to kind of perceive themselves accurately.
So for like the way, like there's parallels that I'm seeing with like we just learned about like a chronic pain thing, and there's a very similar cycle where you feel the pain, and then it causes like a pain response, or there's tissue damage, say, and it causes a pain response, and that goes to the brain, and the brain reacts a certain way, like you go into that fight or flight, or you think about the pain, right? And then what happens after that is the tissue might heal, but because you're in that state of fight or flight, you're in that stress, then like it sends a signal to the body like there's still pain there. And so you get stuck in this kind of cycle. Even though there might not be that tissue damage anymore, you still get stuck in that kind of pain cycle.
Because you're in fight or flight.
Because you're in fight or flight.
Assumes that there's still pain or something?
Yeah. The body assumes there's still pain, and because, say, like they call it this pain, the muscle or the pain spasm cycle. And as like physical therapists, we go in and we break that cycle using some kind of like therapeutic modality, like electrical stimulation or hot or cold, or something that's going to send a different signal to the brain that says these muscles don't need to be in spasm anymore. It calms the muscles down, which in turn breaks up that like pain spasm cycle. So like I see a parallel like within that, even like that's really cool. Not cool for anyone experiencing that, but like just the parallel is cool. Like
understanding,
like
definitely.
The body reacts very similarly, just by the brain and physically. I'm probably butchering the pain spasm cycle explanation, but
there's definitely that strikes me as having a lot of parallels with a lot of emotional stuff as well.
And a lot of chronic pain is tied to emotions too, which is really interesting.
Talk a lot about the mind-body connection in the counseling world. So the two definitely affect each other in some big ways.
What so with like say body dysmorphia, especially somebody who's feeling like I know I've kind of struggled with this in the past of like what like you don't quite see yourself with the truth, right? A lot of guys I know tend to be like, oh, the skinny guys or whatever, and then they tell themselves that they're skinny, and so they go lift a bunch, or they work out, they eat a lot, that way they can like build that muscle. But then as they progress, and I've seen this a lot with some people that I know, is like they can't ever see the progress that they've made. Even though they've made a lot of progress, they still are telling themselves, I'm too skinny, or they come up with all these different things. What kind of things would you say help to like break that cycle?
Yeah, because it's emotional, it's definitely not like a simple thing where you can just like say, oh, just read this line to yourself and it'll solve the problem, right?
Right.
Some of those patterns can be notoriously difficult to deal with. So it's going to be definitely, there's not going to be an easy one-size-fits-all solution. So everyone, I'm sure, has a different experience with it. A few other kind of perspectives for what they're worth with it. In the CBT world, cognitive behavioral therapy world, they also talk about core beliefs. Would be kind of another term. So we talked about a given emotion can have kind of like a specific thought that kind of leads to the emotion that leads to the action. A lot of times we end up having we all probably have some core beliefs, but when you're working on a specific problem in your life, as you're it shows up in all these different ways. Maybe it was something like an eating disorder, or something like kind of body dysmorphia can show up in a whole bunch of different ways, affect your life in a bunch of different ways. Right. But as you kind of look at it and start to kind of like boil it down, try and go deeper and deeper into, hey, what's going on here? A lot of times you can kind of get to like one or a couple kind of core sort of beliefs that keep, say, automatically kind of showing up in the person's mind, or that keep kind of showing up there, right? And it could be a variety of different things, but I don't know, run with something just like, I'll never be fit enough, or something like that. I'll never be enough would be another kind of even more basic one that could kind of be even more generalized for a person, and that could show up in a lot of different things.
What could cause some of those? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of, I'm sure it's also not a one size fits all, but like what are some like common causes of this? Sure.
Yeah. The most like classic example of things like that is for someone to have like a traumatic or like pseudo-traumatic sort of event in their life, right? Especially at a young age. So a lot of times in counseling, it's kind of a little bit of what you call a stereotype of the therapy room, that you're always talking about people's parents and stuff like that. But there's a lot of truth to that. That hey, when we're kids, that's when we're developing the most, that's when we're growing the most and learning the most. And that's when we're really trying to figure out, hey, what is this world that we've been born into and that we're growing up in? And so we learn a lot of our big lessons at that age. So if we have a parent that we could just never please, maybe a parent had their own stuff that they were dealing with, right? So if you have parents that have their own like addiction comes to mind. If you have a parent with an addiction, then they're not going to be as emotionally present to the kid as the kid really needs, right? And so that can the kid has to learn to adapt to that because that's just their world. That's all that they know.
Yeah.
And so, but that can sometimes give them a sense of maybe like, oh, I'm never enough to please my parent. No matter what I do, my parent's never available to me because the parent has this addiction that they're dealing with, right? But the kid doesn't see that. They just feel, I'm never enough.
Yeah.
And then that kind of is in the background. Person's not necessarily always aware of that. That can turn into this core belief that then could manifest in a bunch of different ways. Maybe for the person being like, all right, I just have to keep working out. But at the core of themselves, they feel like they're never going to be enough. And they just always keep believing I'm never enough because they're still kind of trapped as that young kid that could never please their parent.
Okay. Interesting. So like, yeah, so there can be a number of causes, and that's really interesting. I wonder, like, what do you see like as some common, like, I don't know, because not being enough seems like a really broad thing, and it can come up in like academics. It could come up in like how you like fitness. It can come up in your work. Like, what are some other common things that you see that go along with like the belief of like not being enough?
Like you said, it could be show up in a whole bunch of different ways. One of my big areas of interest is couples work and working with couples. So a lot of the different emotional things and core beliefs and stuff that we have do tend to manifest in our most intimate relationships.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you never feel like you'll never be enough, that's definitely going to cause frustrations and difficulties with a partner, which then can cause different kind of negative cycles and stuff like that. So that's definitely where I see it a lot with a lot of clients. But no, it could definitely show up in not having enough confidence to kind of do what you need to do at work, not having the confidence to meet family duties, kind of do self-care in various ways. So yeah, no, you gave a good list as it was.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, kind of on a side tangent, but I'm sure it'll come full circle. Like, I know you said you're like interested in fitness, like you've lifted weights for a while. I don't remember how long you had said. Like, what's your experience with fitness?
I don't remember what the weights either. Probably like 5 or 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty solid.
No, I did it like in high school and then kind of stopped doing weights for a long while.
Yeah.
And got back into it however many years ago. I don't remember now.
Solid. No,
But I've always kind of definitely been a runner ever since high school. So it's always been at least one of the things I've done on the side. And then every winter for the last couple of years, I've been doing an indoor soccer league. So that's also been my main sport since I was like 6. Playing lots of soccer.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So like you played a lot of sports like high school and then now and then
did a lot of frisbee in college.
Oh, that's a classic. So how often do you like exercise, lift weights now?
Yeah, about 3-ish times a week is kind of what I shoot for. So I'll do weights a couple times through the week, and then I'll either go for a run or play soccer over the weekend. So it's kind of the balance that seems to work fairly well for my schedule.
Yeah. And do you find any, like, I don't know, benefits for your own, like, I don't know, this is twofold. One, do you find any benefits for yourself, like psychologically, and then for your clients? Like, do you find that like you're encouraging your clients to like exercise, lift weights, like not even necessarily lift weights, but just like doing recreational activities like frisbee or soccer, you know? Is that something that you find for you and for your clients? Or?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Oh, it makes a huge difference for me. It's been, I built that routine of kind of making sure I'm working out at least 3 times a week a while ago, just because I noticed that when I'm not doing that, my body definitely feels it, and that definitely just impacts everything else in my life. So definitely huge for me. All the literature says that like working out's like one of the best things you can do for your mental health.
Yeah. Well, what kind of benefits? Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to stop you before you got into your clients too. But what kind of benefits do you see it for yourself?
Definitely just like in a better headspace overall. So it affects so many things. Hard to say. It's definitely I'm just calmer and kind of less anxious would definitely be one of the things. My body's more kind of has been worked out and it's more relaxed, and so it makes it easier for me to just kind of sit in the moment rather than getting anxious about things.
Yeah.
It definitely, I like at the creative side as well. So it definitely makes it easier for me to kind of be creative and do my writing projects and things like that. To just be able to sit down and be focused on that rather than always feeling like I have to get up and like go do something else, right? Because my body has all this energy that hasn't been worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, just and then just kind of focus, I suppose, on all the various things I'd want to focus on, whether that's people or chores or projects or whatever.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah. So lots of different things. There's probably even more that I'm not thinking of.
Yeah. Like, when do you recommend it to your clients then?
Yeah. So when I'm doing my intake, meeting someone for the first time, three of the things that I assess them for, or like basically three questions I'll ask, is about kind of their kind of eating patterns, specifically kind of curious about appetite, especially, and kind of whether that fluctuates. But also a person's diet does have big impacts on their mental health. Their sleep.
Learning about that too.
Yeah. Their sleep obviously has lots of big impacts as well. If you're not getting enough sleep, then yeah, you're going to be anxious, and depression's going to be a lot easier, and all those sorts of things, right? So sleep plays a big role, and then exercise. Ask people kind of how much they get up and move around, and kind of how their lifestyle incorporates that. And so if one of those three feels like it's kind of lacking a little bit, that's something I'll kind of keep in mind as a possible kind of like either coping skill or just area of growth that could maybe help the other things that we'll be talking about down the road.
Interesting. Okay. There was something that you said. Oh, well, first of all, that's really interesting, because like those are the three. Well, as a trainer, those are the three areas that I also focus on. Is food, obviously, because like if you want to lose weight, that's like a big deal.
Yeah.
And then two, like your physical activity, because that's literally what I'm training you for. And then three is sleep, because that has a really big impact on progress in the gym. Like if you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to be recovering. And if you're not recovering, then you're not going to be building as much muscle. And as a result, not losing as much weight.
Interesting.
So those are the three big areas that I also focus on. So I was like, this is really interesting. Okay.
Mind-body connection.
Yeah. No, that's that's just really cool. It's really, really cool. What do you, so like what kind of coping mechanisms would you be looking for within like those three categories, I guess? Like,
sure, yeah. So whenever we're getting into working on with a specific emotion, the three core negative emotions that we tend to have are sadness, anxiety, and anger.
Okay.
I guess disgust is maybe another one, but that one doesn't come up as often. So yeah, usually if there's some negative emotion that people are feeling, it can kind of be boiled down to one of those three. And with anger tends to be a secondary emotion, we say, which means that whenever you're feeling anger, there's almost always something that's like beneath the surface that's a little bit more vulnerable, that the anger is kind of like protecting or covering over in some sort of way, right?
Okay.
So someone kind of hurts your feelings, you're sad, but then you get angry because it's much safer to be angry. It's a much stronger emotion to be feeling than kind of the weak emotion of feeling sad, right? Or if someone's kind of like anxious and nervous about things, that's also a pretty vulnerable place to be. So sometimes we get more irritable when we're anxious. And so it's a pretty common thing that when people are depressed, that irritability tends to increase when people are depressed. Also, one of the actual symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder is heightened irritability. Really? So that's actually one of the things that would be like one of the check marks you need in order to kind of qualify for that diagnosis.
Yeah.
So that's kind of basics about negative emotions. What'd you say that got me on that tangent?
Well, no, it was mostly like with the
how to cope with them.
Yeah,
I think,
the
right?
coping strategies. Yeah.
So when people are feeling any of the more specific emotions you can feel in relation to anger, sadness, anxiety, kind of to say, all right, well, you feel this more than you want to, it's affecting your life in some way that's not helpful. Well, let's see if we can do something to kind of regulate that emotion in a different way. So what are some of the coping skills that you could use, right? So I have that with conversation with clients a lot, and clients are going to be much more likely to do the coping skill if they come up with it than if I do. So I'm almost always saying, hey, what do you think would work? What's worked for you in the past? That's almost always where I start. So there's I should have brought some of my sheets with me that kind of list out some of the different coping skills I'll suggest for people. Okay. But we've definitely talked about some of the things already. Definitely doing something physical is definitely one of the big things I'll ask people about. Going up, just getting up and going for a walk, getting up and doing some push-ups, getting up and just doing something to get their body moving often helps with something in the moment. And if they start to incorporate it more regularly into their life, that will also change their overall like emotional state. So if they weren't working out much, then they start doing at least a little bit of something every day, they'll probably be a little bit more anxious kind of overall, right? If that makes sense.
So like you're saying, if they start working out, they'll be more anxious, or they'll be less?
Opposite.
Okay.
Did I say it the wrong way?
I don't know. I was like, wait, am I hearing that right? No, that makes sense. So like if they start doing something every day, then like overall they're going to take that anxiety
Less
level
anxiety.
down just a little bit. Okay.
Exactly.
Even if it's not like a major amount, it's still going to be like something.
It varies a lot
Right.
from person to person.
Okay.
So it could be pretty big. It may be pretty minor.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on the person.
What kind of people do you feel like, I don't know, might be a generalization and maybe not helpful, but, or maybe you can't say, like what kinds of people, or like mindsets do you find that, exercise helps the most for their, like to regulate their anxiety?
Yeah.
It's
a
really
couple things.
question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. A couple things come to mind. One thing that jumped to mind is kind of anything like confidence related. I could see it helping a lot with.
Yeah.
Because when you're exercising, not only are you, get your body kind of giving it a workout and giving yourself just in a better mental state because of that. It's also a difficult thing to do. And by overcoming it and accomplishing it and incorporating that, that's like a win that you get, right? As well as kind of like a structure that you've added into your life. So it's like, hey, if I can do this, I can do other things. And also now just my life is a little bit more structured, a little bit more of my time in the week is actually committed towards something, which means I'm dealing less of the kind of chaos of not knowing what I'm doing with my time, which can also kind of bring down anxiety.
Yeah.
So all those things can definitely contribute to exercise making a big difference, especially for a person that struggles a bit with confidence.
Yeah.
I lost my other thought.
So they would help with like people with more like, say, a confidence thing, or you can confirm or deny this. I don't know if it's true or not, but something that I understand about like anxiety is usually it's you feel like overwhelmed by maybe a multitude of choices, or maybe some kind of I'm sure there's other ones, but specifically that one. And usually to combat that, just taking one little step is sometimes really helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Do you think that would be also another place where like exercise would be applicable? I don't know.
Yeah. All those things are definitely very true. There's a variety of ways to like talk about emotions and mental health, right? So when you're thinking about like what is anxiety, definitely like the unknown tends to be like the biggest source of anxiety for us. So you might say that like death is like the biggest fear, but also death is like the thing which we like don't know what happens afterwards, right? We have no one that has had that experience, and then they come back and say, hey, this is what it felt like, right? Yeah. So there's like, that has the most unknown of like anything. So part of why it's like one of the most terrifying things, right? Yeah. So almost anything anxiety related is going to have like an unknown element to it. And a lot of times when I'm working with people with anxiety of the various different kinds, a lot of what I'm doing is saying, all right, well, hey, you have this anxiety feeling that you feel. What are kind of the thoughts that go with it, right? Following that CBT model. And the more that we're able to kind of list out the thoughts that kind of go with that anxiety, the more that person's able to understand, oh, all right, so this is exactly what I'm afraid of. These are the things that could happen, the bad things that could happen that I'm afraid of. And the more they understand that, the more it makes it easier to kind of like put it in perspective and say, oh, this isn't quite as bad as I felt like it was going to be. Even if the worst case happened, I'd be okay. Yeah. And that just by itself, that kind of realization and putting words to that helps people kind of like bring their anxiety levels down. And also sometimes they're able to say like, wait a second, it feels like this is like 80% chance of this happening, but really it's like a 10% chance. And I know that because it's happened before and it only happened 1 out of 10 times or whatever, right? So giving themselves evidence for how likely a thing is also helps to kind of put things in perspective.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, just to put that so that maybe I'm understanding you correctly. Yeah. I have a couple. I teach martial arts too.
Very fun.
Yeah, no, it is fun. So I have anyone ranging from 3 years old to 70 years old. Nice.
What type of martial art?
Taekwondo.
Nice. My brother does jujitsu, and so I've avoided wrestling him ever since he learned that.
100%. There was something. interesting that I started to realize with some of my students, especially like some of the younger ones, because a lot of times like younger students, they don't hide their like anxiety or anger, or they don't hide, like they can't hide it as well. And so you can really see it like very a lot more. And that was something that I saw help, like the evidence thing was something I saw help a particular student of mine, because that student was like, I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons, but it was really interesting because I was like, this person needs evidence that they can do this thing. And I can tell they're getting really anxious because they're not like able to, they don't feel like they can do it.
Like trying to chop a board or something like that, or
or like even performing like a thing, just like a form or something, you know. And I was like, okay, let's break this down. Let's do one step at a time. Let's give this student evidence that they can do this one little thing, and then let's refer back to that evidence whenever I have them try a new thing, because that reduces their anxiety a lot, and they're more likely to just try it. They're more likely to do it if you bring up that evidence, like, oh hey, yeah, it wasn't so bad last time either. I could probably do that again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like a really interesting thing. Like, yeah.
Our emotions definitely are shaped not by the thoughts and arguments that we have in our heads. Our emotions are shaped by our experiences. So being able to like the evidence, you'd want to make it like a past experience where things were like, okay, that tends to be pretty effective, kind of emotionally, right?
Yeah.
So if you hear like, oh, I'm imagining this form going awful and being embarrassed in front of the whole class,
right.
But then the person remembers, oh, wait a second, last week I did this form and it went okay, and not everybody laughed, and actually someone told me good job.
Yeah.
As a person remembers that experience, that like directly speaks to the anxiety. It's an experience that directly speaks to emotion.
Yeah.
And then that should have the effect of calming them.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also got me thinking of one of my other, maybe one of the most effective things for anxiety in kind of its various different forms is exposure therapy, which is no client's favorite thing, but also one of the most effective things.
Yeah.
And a big part of like doing exposure therapy with someone is very much like breaking it down and making it very much like step by step and kind of starting as little as possible, but a little step that they can also get a win in. So as you were talking about a kid that's like anxious about doing a form, trying to break it down step by step and say, hey, let's just do this little first part first.
Yeah.
They'll be maybe still a little anxious about it, but not nearly as much, right? So they can do it, they can get that win, and then that kind of builds the confidence to then be able to kind of take the next step, right? It makes that a little easier.
Yeah, that's a really good, yeah. That's how I tend to think anyway. So it's like, it's really easy for me to like aid somebody in doing that. I like to break things down. It's like, okay, here's the steps to that thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe talk a little bit about like food. How does like, I know that can be what I find with a lot of my clients is food is the thing that they cope with. And so you kind of have to break through that a little bit.
Yeah.
And not something that I'm formally trained in. So it's really like, I'm really like interested in knowing more about it too. Like what's kind of your approach to that, and what have you seen? Like,
yeah. So obviously the emotional stuff is kind of my main expertise. With both anxiety and depression, part of like the diagnosis process, you'd be looking for effects on appetite. Especially like depression, it's interesting because it can kind of go either way.
Really?
You can either have a person that because they're depressed, it kills their appetite, right? And so they like will go for days without eating, or like eat very little, or just not have to like force themselves to eat, because in that depressed state they just don't feel the appetite anymore.
Interesting.
That can definitely be a sign that that depressive cycle is running.
Yeah.
Anxiety similarly, right? Suppresses the appetite. You can also have with depression kind of the opposite, where someone everything in their life is so bad, or they have this like cycle of negative thoughts going on, which is so overwhelming that they just need something to help them cope. And so sometimes people are like, hey, my coping mechanism is food. And then they just kind of eat because that's the thing that makes them at least feel better for a moment, while everything in the world feels like so dark and so overwhelming. So you can definitely, so So food definitely plays a role in kind of those types of disorders
Yeah.
in some big ways because of those factors.
Mm.
So just kind of a lot of times helping someone kind of be aware of what their eating habits kind of tend to be. If someone like doesn't eat all day and then they feel really bad in the evening, it's like, well, all right, well, maybe part of the issue is that your body just doesn't have any calories, right?
Yeah.
So is there a way for you to kind of make a goal to start like incorporating regular meals into your day somehow? What would that look like for you?
Yeah.
Just kind of helping them to kind of structure that into their day to make sure they're getting the meals that they need. Alternatively, you could have someone who like the food is the thing that they go to, right? When they start to feel bad or feel something, they go to the food. Generally, people are just aware that, hey, I do this thing I don't like. I eat more than I should. I eat too many Lay's potato chips or whatever, right? And that's the thing that they see most obviously, and they're like, I want to stop that. Usually before you can stop that, you have to say, all right, well, what happened before you ate the potato chips?
Yeah.
And really helping the person start to become aware of, all right, I ate the potato chips when I was feeling anxious, or I ate the potato chips when I was feeling like I wasn't enough for my partner, or I ate the potato chips when whatever, right? Be able to name kind of those thoughts and feelings and that kind of experience that goes before the action of eating the potato chips. And then once they know that it comes from them being maybe anxious, right? Then they can say, all right, well, the next time I'm anxious, and I know that I'm anxious when I feel like my stomach's a little upset. I feel anxious when my body feels tense. Maybe I feel anxious when I start to get irritable or whatever it is. They know what their triggers are so that they can identify when they're anxious. And then they make a plan for, all right, well, I know that when I'm anxious, it usually makes me feel better to walk around the house, or usually makes me feel better to call a friend, makes me feel better to whatever coping skill we end up picking. I do a lot of grounding skills and breathing kind of exercises with people as well. Okay. So they do their coping skill, and that helps them to feel better, and then they don't have as much of an urge to eat that potato chip anymore, right? Because they've addressed the underlying emotion.
Okay. So you help them to like identify like effectively like triggers, like what is and I can see how that would lead into those like core what would you say, core thoughts,
core beliefs,
core beliefs, I can see how that really does, because if like every time you feel inadequate, you start to feel anxious or depressed, and then the outward expression of that might be like you don't eat, or you do eat a lot. Yes. And I could see how that would really connect to that.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of already went into this, but like how do you break that down? Like if someone's really confused, like they continually go back to the same thing. They're really confused as to how they keep getting there. Like what do you do to break that down?
I'm trying to understand the question. It's generally a matter of just kind of like making it as concrete as possible, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is if someone has something big going on in their life and they're really just having a hard time, they keep like bouncing all over the place of kind of all the things in their life that are just overwhelming them. Kind of a lot of what my role is kind of like organizing the experience. So maybe they have like 5, 6, 7 different kind of big things that are going on, and especially if I'm like just meeting them and we're in the first early sessions, a lot of times I'll let people just kind of like go through everything, right? Because they have all the stuff that they just kind of need to get out there. They need someone to kind of hear and to understand. So I do a lot of reflective listening of letting them know, oh yeah, I hear that you're having issues with your relationship. Oh, I hear that you're disappointed in your workout life. Oh, I hear that you're feeling like you have problems with your mom or whatever it is, right? And kind of go through and get the list of all the things. And then as we go on, and as I feel like, all right, they've kind of told me the big picture. Now, all right, they also told me that these are their goals. So what's one thing today we can do to kind of help them with that goal? Some people are really good about being able to say, all right, this is the goal I want to focus on today. Yeah. Other people, it just feels so overwhelming that it becomes kind of my job to say like, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we talk about this one. Is it okay if we focus on this one?
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of narrow it for them by picking a specific kind of goal. And then as we get into that, part of my role is as they kind of jump around is to kind of like bring them back gently to whatever the topic is that we're trying to accomplish for them that day. And then also, trying to make it as concrete as possible, I would say.
It makes a lot of sense.
So if we're focusing on them trying to eat fewer potato chips, then I would say, all right, well, when's the last time that you ate too many potato chips, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, no, just not just generally, right? But hey, was it yesterday? Was it the day before? All right,
Mm-hmm.
was it morning? Was it afternoon? Hey, what all was going on? Maybe you can even bring back the memory and tell me some of the things you're seeing at the time. And really try to make that kind of memory really alive and present in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Help them really kind of immerse themselves in it.
Mm-hmm.
Then that makes it a little easier for them to remember, oh yeah, I was feeling anxious
Mm-hmm.
about my schoolwork before I started eating those potato chips, right?
Mm-hmm.
But trying to make it as concrete and bring them kind of memory alive as much as possible is often something I'll do a lot with clients to really try and kind of narrow in on understanding what otherwise feels like a really confusing situation.
Yeah.
So I don't know if all that made sense.
No, that does. It makes a lot
some
of
of the
sense.
pieces of kind of what I try to do with people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, because this is something I tell people a lot is, especially whenever they have a specific like fitness goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're and then they fail, like they don't reach the time frame that they wanted, or they aren't exercising as much as they wanted to, or they, like, I could go down a laundry list of other ones, and then like they get really angry and like upset because like I didn't achieve this goal that I really wanted to, and I set out to do, and that kind of thing. And then like what I try to do is I'm like, okay, I have the bird's eye view. You're in it, and you're thinking about a lot of different things. You're thinking about your life at home. You're thinking about how you failed this. You're thinking about work. You're thinking about like your kids. You're thinking about that one time that this one person at work said this one thing. But I have the bird's eye view. Let's organize it all, like you're saying. Like, let's go through and think about, okay, first of all, it's okay that you didn't succeed. It's not the end of the world, because we can try again. We can keep going. Like,
that self-compassion is huge in the mental health world as well.
Yeah. And the brain body connection, right? So I take the bird's eye view, and I say, first of all, it's okay that you didn't achieve this goal. Like, and then I just go through each of those maybe different categories that they told me about, like, and then usually there's an underlying theme with them, like, they, like, for instance, I have one person who, like, they had like a really rough like week at work. They come in and like they're feeling just physically run down, like not super great. They didn't like do all the exercise that they wanted to that week, and then like, yeah, it really affects the session. And then it's like, okay, well, first of all,
because they're feeling disappointed in
yes,
themselves, it affects their ability to like perform when they're having the session with 100%.
100%. Yeah, especially when it comes time to like do high intense exercises where it's like, okay, performance is key. Like that like the psychological aspect really does affect that. And so if I'm not able to like break that down and be like, okay, well, these things over here were not your fault. Like, they did not, like, that had nothing to do with you. You were just in that situation. Like, especially for people who are like bosses and like in management type situations, like they really take a hit with that. And yeah, it really does affect their physical performance. And that's why I focus on it, because it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm doing cognitive behavioral therapy with them, but like, I'm more of the positive self-talk. I'm like, let me be that for you right now.
Kind of modeling what
positive
self-talk looks like for
exactly.
them.
Yeah. I forget where I was going with that, but that, it's really, it's a key thing that, like, so yeah.
I was struck by, I could imagine there definitely are negative feedback cycles that people get into. Kind of one where you're like describing where someone like fails at like their workout routine or something like that, which then is going to lower their mood, which would make it harder for them to perform the next time that they try because they're already feeling disappointed.
Yeah.
Which means they're going to get disappointed again because they're not at their best, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which can then kind of add on top of that and make them even more disappointed.
Yeah.
And so negative feedback cycles like that are definitely things. Most mental health disorders probably have some sort of negative feedback loop as a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to like catch it, being able, a lot of times it's like being able to kind of just have the self-compassion and say, hey, this is where I'm at. There were some factors at least outside of my control, so it's at least not all my fault, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it was that went wrong, maybe a part of it is. I'm sure you can kind of own up to that, but being able to say, hey, these are some of the other factors going on that contributed to it is often helpful for a lot of people, especially kind of conscientious types that like to try and take as much on themselves as they can. So yeah, I could see you modeling that for them. I could see doing people a lot of good if they're able to kind of then start to do that for themselves as well.
Yeah. That's always my hope, is like, I want them to be able to do this on their own. But there was another thing that I was gonna mention in there. I can't remember what it was. Is there any other, like, I don't know. Oh, I was still going to talk about stress, because stress is another thing like that really highly impacts performance in the gym.
Yeah,
like physical performance. I always explain it like you have a bucket, and you have work. It's being poured into the bucket. You have school. That's being poured into the bucket. You have family. That's being poured in the bucket. You have working out. That's being poured into the bucket. You had a knee injury. That's being poured into the bucket. So you have all these things that are pouring into the bucket, and eventually it's going to overflow. It only has a certain capacity. And what I like to tell people is like even going to the gym is a stressor into that bucket. Mm-hmm. So if everything else is being elevated, you're having a stressful like time with your family this week, and your job is being like particularly stressful. Mm-hmm. Those are going to be pouring even more into the bucket. Like, so maybe you've got to take your physical activity and drop it down to accommodate that, so that this bucket doesn't overflow.
Yeah. No, I use the phrase emotional bandwidth is one that I, for whatever reason, tend to fall back on.
Yeah.
The image of like a bucket is also a really good one for that sort of thing, which I think I've used as well.
Bandwidth, emotional bandwidth. Yeah. No, that's exactly.
We are kind of, we have limits on how much we can kind of emotionally sustain in a given day.
So how do you like to like explain that to people, and what are things that you're particularly looking out for?
Yeah. It's definitely something that I guess I'm aware of and definitely comes up. Definitely some clients. Sometime when a client is consistently having difficulty like with the job, I suppose it probably is where it's come up the most for me. Part of me is trying to figure out what is the actual barrier, what's making it difficult for them to like sustain their normal performance with this job. And something's blocking them because they used to do this well, now they're not doing as well. Okay, what is it that's going on? And sometimes it's they're depressed, sometimes it's they kind of have all these things that they're anxious about, sometimes it's an OCD pattern, sometimes it's just that they have too much on their plate, right? And as we kind of like cross out all the other things, like, oh, you're doing all the right things, I don't really see necessarily any like core negative beliefs or whatever, but there's just like so much you're trying to do in this job. Some people try to do like basically 3 jobs in one, just the way their like situation is kind of like played out. It's like, hey, that's just kind of a lot that you're trying to do, right? And sometimes, I kind of affirm that for them. I'll be like, yeah, it feels like a lot. And so being able to kind of speak to that, sometimes people are able to get to the point of saying like, all right, I'm just kind of like burning out, right? When someone tries to sustain too much stress for too long. And that's, what would you say? That's not an internal thing. That's like a circumstantial thing. That's like, all right, well, as long as you're in the midst of all these stressors, some things a person can do to try and kind of change it. Stress and anxiety tend to like play into each other a lot, and they're sometimes hard to distinguish from each other, almost like the same thing sometimes. So doing different things to cope with anxiety or reframe the way that the person views their different stressors or their different tasks can take some of the edge off, but hey, there's still things that need to be done, and so they're still going to take some of that emotional bandwidth they're going to pour some liquid into that bucket.
Yeah.
And if there's just too many things, then we're all only human and we can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to acknowledge that and figure out if the person's able to change something in their circumstances to remove some of those stressors is oftentimes necessary.
What kind of things would you tell a client that is struggling with, like, maybe it is an external thing that like is stressing them, and that bucket's being overflowed because of like just they're doing everything else right. But like how would you reassure them? Like what kind of things would you do?
Yeah. So it's a little helpful for people even just to kind of have the safe place of counseling to come in and just like vent of, hey, my life feels awful right now because I'm so overwhelmed. So having a person there for them is one of the things that goes a long way. We talk about in my graduate training, we talked about the biopsychosocial model. So kind of saying that, hey, people kind of have three main parts to them. We kind of have our like biological aspect, like all of our kind of like physical stuff. So if a person is overwhelmed in their life and they're doing most of the right things, but they just have like so much on their plate, right? It's like, all right, well, what are some like physical things you can do for yourself, right? Do you need to just go home and like take a long bath or something like that, right? Some sort of self-care in like a physical sort of way.
Okay.
Do you need to change something in your diet to kind of like help just kind of give you a little bit more energy to get through the day? Those sort of kind of biological sort of things, right? Some of the things we might explore of ways to kind of like, I guess with your image, to take a little bit out of the bucket. To help them kind of recuperate a little bit in that sort of way. Other things that tend to help a lot would be like creating I'm imagining like going for a quiet walk in the woods, right? Like a nature walk, setting aside time, which isn't just like distracted time of kind of like being on screens or watching Netflix, but just kind of quiet time to actually kind of reset and give the person's kind of internal life time to settle down and kind of calm down. That'd probably fall in the biological kind of side of things of having that space to physically just decompress. Biological, psychological would definitely be more kind of the thoughts, right? So with someone who's very much overwhelmed, I'd be like, all right, well, hey, you're dealing with a lot. What are the strengths you're bringing to the table? What are some of the successes that you're having every day? What are just some of the beautiful little moments that you kind of have throughout the day that you can be grateful for, right? Gratitude tends to go a long way. Do you know that you will get through this, even if it's like going to be difficult, right? Okay, tell me about that, right? Really trying to have them create a vision of this is what the future looks like. Maybe it'll suck, but they know they're going to get through it, or this is the date which they know they'll be done with this work project, or they'll be graduating on this date, or whatever it is, right? Helping them to really say, hey, I can get through this because of this evidence, right? So those would be some of the psychological things. I would encourage a person to maybe even write down somewhere that they could see every day, or maybe have some things that they say to themselves every day, something in that ballpark, right? And then the social definitely goes a long way as well. Saying, hey, who are the people in your support network? Who are the family that are there for you? Who are the friends you can trust? Are there people that you don't lean on that much right now, but that you could lean on, right? A lot of people are kind of hesitant to lean on the people around them because they are afraid of being a burden. But when I ask them, they say like, well, no, my friend Sam, if I asked, they would definitely listen to me. They would go out and get a drink or whatever, right? And so like, well, hey, you're in a tough time right now. If any time is going to be the time, now might be the time to ask your friend to do that phone call or meet up and get that drink or whatever. And so definitely encouraging people to use their social networks to have a place where they can kind of vent this and share this so they don't feel as alone. That actually goes a long way for people of kind of being able to deal with a lot more than they thought they could. They don't feel like they're alone in it.
So those are really good. You know what's funny is the biopsychosocial, like, that's not the first time this has come up on this podcast.
Oh yeah.
The last guest I had on was a physical therapist, like a doctor of physical therapy, and he was talking about the biopsychosocial framework of pain. Because like I was talking about before, that's a big thing that like if you have more anxiety, like what's interesting is if you go into like something that I see a lot when like on my clinical rotation, say, is the people that I tend to see have long-standing pain, chronic pain, also they tend to be more anxious type people. And so they always tell us you're not only a physical therapist, but sometimes you're just a therapist.
Yeah,
Because
I'm not surprised.
sometimes you need to be that social part of that biopsychosocial, and so you're listening to them. You're not necessarily counseling them because you can't under like the
doing it in a license sort of way.
Yeah, it's not under that license. Yeah.
The reason why what we do as counselors works is because it's just like a basic human thing of being there for each other, right?
Yeah.
And we're just trained to be kind of more consistent and doing a lot of that and stuff like that. But it's all very human things that a lot of it friends can just do for each other in different ways.
But I find it really interesting that, again, that like comes up again. But now it's in a context of the more, I don't know, this seems more applicable to more people than necessarily like the physical therapy side of it. Because of physical therapy, it would be more like we're looking at pain and injury and that kind of stuff.
Sure, no. You probably think of it in terms of like needs, maybe would be a good framework.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, we have kind of like three main buckets of needs: our biological needs, our psychological needs, and our social needs. Yeah. So yeah, everyone can kind of think about their life and say, all right, what are the ways that I'm meeting my those three different buckets of needs?
Yeah. And this is not necessarily related to what you just said, but something else I just thought of was we also do the biological because we're exercising them, and hot pack and cold pack, like those all have like an effect biologically, which affect you psychologically.
Yes.
But what I thought was really interesting about what you said with like especially the stress and like that bucket being overfilled and like they're doing everything else right is like that gratitude aspect, and really reorienting themselves to like gratitude and the strengths that they bring to the table. Like what are they actually doing? Because sometimes I think people get lost in that. I'm in it. I'm like struggling. I'm just trying to get through the day. I'm trying to get through the week, and then they don't have that time to just kind of like really know like what did I actually do this week? What did I actually accomplish? Which I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting. Kind of those things that you said.
Yeah, the word attention is very much jumping to mind as you're kind of like talking through that. And definitely, I guess a lot of times when I'm meeting a person or working with a client, I'm a lot of times trying to imagine, all right, where's their attention at, kind of in their life, right? And yeah, if the person's spending all their time being like, all right, this is the next thing I have to do, this is the next thing I have to do, this is the next thing I have to do. And they're never kind of having those moments of like celebration, right? Where their attention is on, oh, I just did that thing. I just accomplished that thing.
Yeah.
And allowing those moments of celebration, letting your attention dwell on that for a period of time. It's not like a prideful thing to do. It's like a legitimate, like necessary thing, I would say. We definitely are wired to kind of respond well to positive and negative incentives. So kind of what being rewarded, or if you have like a kid, you reward them for doing something or you punish them for doing something, right? That'd be the most classic example for it. But as adults or as kids, one of the ways we can like reward ourselves for doing a good job is like allowing ourselves to celebrate it, giving ourselves even just a few moments after like that workout at the gym, right? Saying, oh, hey, I actually did everything I was supposed to do. I hit some, new weights or whatever, right? And kind of celebrating that feels really nice. Yeah. And that makes it easier and more motivating than the next time you go to the gym.
100%.
Whereas if you're like, all right, done with the gym, now I'm going to go to the grocery store. Run my next errand, right? You never celebrate. Well, then the only thing you're going to have is those kind of negative moments where it's like, oh, I didn't quite hit my goal. And that's going to then kind of eat away motivation a bit. If you're only letting the negative happen, you're never taking the time to focus on the positive and be grateful.
With that, like the motivation aspect, like and like the reinforcement, how would you? Because I know some people say they come to me, right? I'm helping them exercise, lift weights, eat well, looking at sleep, all of those things, and they end up like, I don't know, something I try to do during my sessions is like, yeah, you did a great job. Like you hit those weights. That's really good. That's great.
Yeah.
And so it's a reinforcement. It's a positive reinforcement of that. But like, how would you help someone to, instead of that being an external source of like encouragement, how would you help them transition to more of an internal source of like that encouragement and that positive reinforcement?
First off, so it's definitely should be a both and sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely want to have people around us that are encouraging us. If we're, yeah, there's a reason why we sometimes like doubt ourselves, right? Sometimes we can get into like we're trying to accomplish a goal and we're like, yeah, I'm the best at this. But then we have like a trusted friend come and say, hey, actually, you have a few weaknesses you should probably look at, or maybe this isn't the best use of your time, right? And so there's a reason why we have that kind of like we're
100%.
We want people to kind of give us external input. So it's important to be able to kind of, when you see someone doing something good, to affirm it to them, right?
Yeah.
Or for a person to be able to kind of like accept that when you say that to the people you work with. Yeah, that's definitely, them getting that from you is very important for them, I imagine. But no, yeah, definitely to sustain a goal into the long term, there needs to be some like internalized ability to self-motivate and do self-talk and things like that, right? So specify your question for me again. It was
like how like for someone who doesn't necessarily do that already, of like the positive self-talk of like, I did accomplish that and I did a great job. How would you help them to like develop that?
So two things. Mine goes in two different ways. One is just kind of giving them some sort of suggestion on how to like start doing the practice, right? Of, hey, this is what you can actually do to build the habit of, I guess, positive self-talk, right? It would be something like a gratitude journal would be something I'd recommend to people, right? Of, hey, every day after you finish working out, list, they put in their phone, or if they have like a journal or something like that, just either write down or say to yourself 5 things you came up with that are these are things I did well during the gym, or maybe it's just one. I don't know what would kind of work for the people, right? But somehow specifically listing out specific things that they did well and just giving some sort of structured way for the person to be able to affirm things to themselves, right? And it's sometimes people be like, well, I didn't do anything right. It was all awful, right? So then you say like, all right, well, what's not, what's the best thing, I guess, right? And best is relative. So you're encouraging them to basically just kind of say like, all right, well, of the things you did do, you at least walked into the gym, right?
Yeah.
Hey, at least you took 5 steps into the gym, right? Well, there's something, whatever. So whatever the best things are that they can come up with would kind of be the way you would probably structure the task.
Okay.
So something like that would be the most practical thing. Likely, and this is partly what I do, and it'd be a little harder and probably your setting to do it. But if a person is struggling to name like the positive things in themselves or the positive things that they're accomplishing, there's probably some sort of block. Block is definitely a term that I end up using for a lot of different clients. Of if there's something that someone is wanting to do, it's like definitely a valued goal that they have, but they just keep not doing it and they don't know why. There's a block of some sort that's preventing them from doing that. So really, that's a lot of where I get curious. I'm like, all right, well, what is that block? What is it?
Yeah.
You want to do this thing, you're not doing it. What is that? So really, if the person is able to identify what's going on for them, that blocks them from being able to name kind of all the good things that they did right. So one example comes to mind is if you have like a kid that like got like really bullied in middle school, they might start to make a lot of friends in high school. They might start to like work out and accomplish a lot of things. They might do really good in school, but they still might feel really depressed and still feel like they're alone, or still feel like they're not succeeding in these different aspects of their life, partly because they still have these memories of being bullied and these kind of things that they internalize from that experience of being bullied that serves as a block to them kind of being able to thrive in their new environment. So if a person is able to say like, oh yeah, I had this experience of being bullied, or some other really bad experience with working out or fitness in the past, right? And that still kind of haunts me a little bit. If they're able to identify that sometimes helps them to say, okay, that was me back then. Maybe I need to like talk about that with a friend or something like that, just to kind of like process through that. But hey, this is me now and this is different. So even though I have these feelings, those are connected to the past. They're not as connected to the present.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. lot of good stuff that you just said.
There's a lot packed in there.
Yeah,
so.
no, that's great. It gives me a good idea of like even like what's beyond me, because not I can't do everything for a client in an hour. You know, I can't show them how to exercise, eat well, sleep well, and be their like cognitive behavioral therapist. You know,
Yeah.
But it gives me a great idea of like when to like send them your way and be like, hey, have you ever considered like going to see a therapist for that? Or here's a question that comes off of that is when or how would you approach that conversation? How would you approach the conversation of like, I think maybe this person would really benefit from like cognitive behavioral therapy,
Sure. Yeah.
or like talking with somebody. How would you approach the conversation of like referring them to that without it being insulting,
Sure.
or like them taking offense to it, or something like
that? Yeah. Trying to imagine what usually I'm the one receiving, right? So I'm not always the one. I wouldn't be the one necessarily doing like referring in that sort of way. So it'd look a little different for me. Generally, noticing things is one of the safest ways to approach anything that could be like an awkward conversation. Like, hey, I just noticed that. I don't know. I noticed that you seem to be pretty anxious pretty much every time we kind of like get together to work out, right? You'd have to kind of have your own style as to far as how you say it, right?
Yeah.
But then something that would fall like, is that something you would want to like see different in your life? Is it something you've ever thought about talking with someone about? Yeah. That'd probably be one of the classic kind of phrases, right? Have you ever thought about talking with someone about that? Definitely mental health counseling has become overall less stigmatized in the culture than it used to be. So especially a lot of some of the young kids apparently go and like tell all their friends about their counseling experiences, whereas some of the older adults I work with are still like, no, nobody in my life knows that I go to counseling. So there's definitely like a generational difference there. 100%. So I could imagine that younger folks would just kind of be more open to the suggestion in general, but definitely just affirming to the person that, hey, counselors see all sorts of people for all sorts of different things. Lots of athletes will kind of like work through different kind of like anxieties in counseling, and that definitely creates a great space to do that. Counselors are always there to support the person's specific goals, so the person can go in and say, hey, this is the thing that I want to work on, and the counselor's there, and we're trained to be non-judgmental, and we tend to also just be a pretty caring bunch. That's why we got into the field, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. Kind of any of those sorts of things, depending on the person. Could be some of the aspects of counseling worth saying, and just saying, hey, have you ever thought about talking to someone about that? Would probably be the way I would suggest kind of going into it. And then if you had a particular practice or something to kind of give them, that often makes it a little easier for people. So they have something specific rather than just, I should find a counselor somewhere.
No, well, I have two thoughts. We'll start with the first one. Like, how do you approach like whenever you get a client who isn't like they obviously they came to you, so there's at least some openness to therapy, but like how do you approach if they're a little bit like uncomfortable with it?
Yeah, so definitely especially with kids and sometimes spouses who were told by their spouse to go to counseling. Those are probably the situations where I'm most likely to get a client who's like, well, I was told to be here, so I'm here, but I don't really want to be here.
I could see
so that definitely happens sometimes.
But
no, there's usually at least a little bit of openness to working with the process. Definitely lots of people that are nervous about counseling. They haven't done it before, or they're just like a kind of anxious disposition and stuff. I don't actually do a lot different for those situations versus anyone else that walks in the room. For my intakes, there's different ways to go about intakes. Some counselors have very like structured intakes where it's like, all right, these are our 25 questions, probably more. However many questions they're going to go through, and they're very specific in all the information that they're gathering, which usually means they have really robust intake and they have like all the information. If they need to figure something out about the person, they're like, all right, I know exactly where to go to find that, right? My approach tends to be a much more unstructured sort of interview for my intakes. I know kind of the basic information that I kind of need to make sure that I'm getting. Like I mentioned those 3 things earlier. As long as they give me the space to talk about it, I'll usually ask them, all right, what's your appetite look like? What's your sleep look like? What's your exercise look like? Right. So I have kind of a mental list of kind of a handful of different questions like that. Like suicidality would be another thing I'm assessing with pretty much every client that comes in the door. But for the most part, I'm kind of give them my spiel about confidentiality. And I say, all right, what brought you here? And then from there, it's mostly them just kind of walking through whatever is kind of causing them distress in their life. And I kind of let them take the lead, and I just kind of jump in and ask questions as they get curious about things, or as I want more context on something. And people generally really like being listened to. As someone that they feel like is like hearing them and understanding them and is curious about them. So my experience has been almost everybody that comes in
ends up just
even the nervous ones. I have as much success with them as anybody else.
They're
just like, oh, this guy just kind of wants to learn about me. He's not going to judge me. And so most people by the end of the first session are like, oh, that went better than I expected it to. So as long as I'm just there and I'm genuinely curious in them, that tends to go a long way.
I'm sure that like I don't know, I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson here and there, but
same here.
he's great.
Agreed.
But I'll like something he said that I really loved was he was like, if you really want to know if somebody's listening to you or if you want to like really let someone know that you're listening, you repeat back to them what you said. What they said, sorry. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And that's something that I wish I did more, but I know it at least. I know that it's good.
Active listening is a phrase that you could Google and kind of look into. And summarizing is like one of the little skills or whatever that they teach us. That is probably one of my favorite things. And the thing that I probably rely on maybe even more heavily than some other therapists. I'll periodically stop the person like, all right, what I think I heard you say is, try to rephrase it back to them as well as I can, right?
Right. And they kind of, what I tend to find whenever I do that to people is they'll expand even more. So if I really want to get somebody to talk, I'll do that because they'll expand out even more after you ask that question or like you repeat back to them what they said, because either it triggers something else or like, it's great. But so my other thought was, this is not related to listening, was like something that I'm trying to do, or that somebody told me that is really good, is to build like a network of like people who I know are good at what they do, that can also help people, like what you do. What first of all, what would you call what you do? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or would you call it something else?
Mental health counseling would probably be the kind of most generic term for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I, like if I were to recommend somebody to you, I'd be like mental health counseling.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mental health therapy, mental health counseling are kind of interchangeable terms.
Okay. But like mental health counseling, or like a doctor that I know and I trust, or a chiropractor, or a physical therapist, or done a laundry list of different like modalities of treating the human person. So yeah, I'd love to just stay in contact with you, and like if ever, like if I do like have somebody who I'm like, I think they would really benefit from talking to Josh, or just how would somebody get in contact with you? How would I refer someone to you?
Sure. So the place I work at is called Anchoring Hope Counseling. It's down in Springboro.
Okay.
So basically we have our clients kind of just call in, and there's a number online. I don't know it off the top of my head. I could try, but I'd probably get it wrong. But if someone calls into our site, there's like 15-ish therapists that work there. It's kind of a private practice, outpatient setting. But basically people can call in, they say, hey, I would like to, Josh would be my preferred, Josh Miller is kind of my preferred therapist. I have a bio on our website and stuff like that as well. But that's generally the way that people would kind of get me as a counselor.
Mhm.
And then obviously if you wanted to kind of like let me know, hey Josh, I'm sending someone your way.
Yeah.
I have a couple people that'll do that with me as well.
Solid. Yeah.
So that'd probably be the most direct and easiest way
Heck
to get me, to find me.
That's the website was like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna get the name wrong. Anchored in Hope, or
Anchoring Hope.
Anchoring Hope. Okay.
Anchoring Hope Counseling. Yeah.
Anchoring Hope. Okay.
Anchored in Hope might get you there too. I haven't tried that one, but
Yeah, I don't know.
usually if you Google it,
Okay.
it's like the first thing that tends to come up. Yeah, Anchoring Hope Counseling.
Okay.
Springboro, Ohio.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks for coming and talking. And
yeah, well, like we discussed, physical exercise makes a big difference in people's
does.
lives. So good to know that you're up here,
Yeah.
helping people with exactly that.
100%. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks
dude.
for having me.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun.